So the biggest one that we hear all the time is the nasty B word, budget.
Yeah.
So why is it so important to decide on your budget, especially in the beginning?
So budget determines everything. It determines if you're having your wedding at the nicest place in town, or maybe you have to go a little bit outside of town to fit in budget. So, you definitely want to have that conversation. It's not fun, but you want to have an idea of where your budget lies. So have that conversation with anyone who you think is going to be contributing to the wedding. If that's the two of you guys, make sure you guys have a conversation about that. Maybe you talk about setting up a bank account and setting aside some money every month.
That's a good idea.
Make sure you talk to, both sets of parents. What are they hoping to contribute? Are they contributing a lump sum, or are they going to kind of approve things as you come to them with requests? Are they buying the dress and the venue but leaving the bar and the food up to you? So have those conversations and have a good idea of where that money is coming from, and then you can sit down and start looking at venue and style, and most importantly guest list, because your guest list is going to be the biggest contributor to your budget. So you want to have a really good idea of what that looks and feels like before you start getting too far into planning.
No, that's fair. That's fair. So, okay, we've had that conversation. We've talked to the parents. We've talked to each other on what we're all willing to contribute. Now, with the budget as far as it's concerned, where do you start?
It can be very overwhelming. So shameless plug, Planner's a great way to start. They can help you understand what the averages are in your local market, how to divvy up your money, where to put the money in the things that are most important for you. But if that's not 100% sure you're going to go that route, then a great place to start is looking at what is important to you. So sit down and list out everything that's going to go into your budget. So wedding budgets are this weird thing. Like I kind of mentioned, some people might be contributing and want to pay for, dress and venue and bar, but maybe they're not paying for the rings or the honeymoon or whatever it is. So decide what goes into that main budget of where most of the money is coming from, and then prioritize. So is food and beverage and band or DJ your number one priorities, or is the look your number one priority? And so kind of set those expectations with yourself, and then do a little bit of research. Find out what are kind of the averages. Ask your friends, ask your any vendors that you have booked, and just kind of get an idea of how that money is going to spend and where it's going to go.
Okay. So that you bring up an interesting question, though. So there's a million kind of resources out there, even like a Bustld, right? There's a million things out there, and they all seem to say a different thing. How do you know what's true, what's not true, what's sort of true? How do you know if the data is skewed? I mean, how do you, as an engaged couple, how do you kind of sift through all that information and kind of decide what is realistic for the different categories?
Yeah, I mean, again, a planner is a great resource for that, but if you're looking at a site like a Bustld, you can find out a lot of great information as far as kind of reaching out to maybe a few of your vendors that are your top picks and getting like initial pricing information. I always encourage you to kind of have that conversation with the vendors, let them know, okay, I'm not sure if this is going to fit in my budget. I may not be in touch for a couple of weeks. Don't leave them hanging. But definitely kind of gather your information, talk to your engaged or married friends, keeping in mind, if they got married a couple of years ago or in a different market, that is not going to necessarily be comparable apples to apples, but it is always a good idea to kind of get that insight and get that kind of validation from your friends.
Sure.
And then I think also like the first thing you're going to book is obviously your venue. So you're going to look at those and kind of compare apples to apples. I encourage couples to say, okay, this venue offers chairs and linens and food and beverage. This space is a blank space, so I'm going to have to bring in all those things, and then you can start kind of comparing what those costs would look like. So get initial quotes, do your research on the front end, and then you'll make sure that you're spending your money in the right way.
I think that's great advice, because whether it's you planning a wedding or anything really, you should make sure you can compare apples to apples and understand kind of what things cost when you don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's great advice. And then another kind of thing that always comes to mind too is really, prioritizing what matters to you. So even averages in and of themselves are somewhat kind of irrelevant, right? Because
Right.
it's really what it matters to you as an individual and as a couple.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we talk to couples who their number one priority is their venue, or their number one priority is having, the most amazing flowers or the best band. So even if the average is, for that category is $3,000, if it's your number one category and it's the most important to you, then maybe you're going to spend a little more than the average. Maybe you're going to spend $4,000 or $5,000 there, and then maybe some things that are less of a priority to you, you're going to spend a little under average.
Sure.
So I think making sure that you keep that in mind and that you spend the money in the right places, and then continually, the budget's not a set in stone number. So if your most important thing is your photographer and you overspend in that category, and then you go back to that list that you guys made in the beginning and say, okay, invitations are a little less important to us. Maybe, we can cut and not do something custom. Maybe we go to an online website and save a little bit of money there to make up for the money that we overspent. So continue to work on that budget and think of it as an ongoing conversation and ongoing topic, and make sure that you are checking in on your budget on occasion.
No, that's yeah, absolutely.
It's not a one-time kind of thing, because then you'll get to the end and you'll have overspent, and then it causes frustration and uncomfortable conversations of more money. And that's another thing to think about too. Is your budget set in stone? Do you have X number of dollars and that is it? In that case, definitely maybe underestimate, build yourself a little bit of a buffer so that you aren't spending the money and then coming up at the end and still needing, 3 big categories of things and not have any money left.
Right.
So
especially when you get to the categories towards the end that tend to book later, you're going to want to get a cake from a professional baker.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You're not going to want a friend to make that. You're going to want that beautiful tiered cake that you've always dreamt of, but because you spent too much in the beginning and weren't keeping track, you've sort of kind of lost track of it. So
right.
I think that's great advice. And I think the big kind of takeaway there is to make sure that you do make that list. Make sure that you have got in a priority list and you can kind of go back to it, because the wedding planning process for us was emotional, and for our couples and Sammy's couples as a planner, it's an emotional one. So you want to make sure that you kind of set yourself up for success and have those things ranked as you go, and you can start to kind of negotiate with yourselves on where and how to spend the money. I think that was your main.
Yeah, and I mean also, if something is super important to you guys and you guys have a little, extra money that maybe you can pull from later, increase that budget a little bit and still feel comfortable with it. But of course you want to have that conversation. Money's not a fun thing to talk about, and it certainly doesn't want to go into a marriage feeling frustrated with money before you even get married.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So speaking of, what are some common mistakes couples make when budgeting?
I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit, but definitely getting really excited and booking something without talking about budget. So especially, obviously the venue, and a lot of those include catering and bar. So kind of going in and spending money that you haven't sat down and kind of figured out how much money you have, and then having a very small amount left to spend on all the other things you need to make that wedding
Sure.
day possible. So I think that's the biggest mistake people make, is they get really excited and they book something and then they realize they don't have enough money for everything else. And then I think the other biggest mistake is not thinking about the little things. So little things add up. Gratuities at the end of planning.
Always tip your vendors.
So things like that really, really add up. Small things like the marriage license and postage and
Sure, postage is expensive when
Yeah.
you add it up times 125 guests
right.
for
And you need 2 per
Invitation,
invitation at
and then-
least,
yep,
and you
yep.
have your save the dates. So little things like that, if you want calligraphy, that's such a nice touch. So a lot of those things are little things that get cut at the end, like you were talking about, because you kind of spent that money on the front end. So make sure that you're budgeting for all the things that go into the budget, so you're not feeling frustrated at the end that you can't have what you want.
Perfect. And then lastly, what sort of tools, besides Bustld, of course, what sort of tools could couples use to help them with the budget process? What sorts of things do your couples use as something perfect and just you've kind of seen out there that are helpful?
I mean, a budget can be everything as simple as an Excel document to, online trackers. Obviously, depending on how you think about budget. But I think it's the best thing to do with it is to have something that's shared between everyone who's contributing to the budget. So, a Google Drive is a great way to kind of share that Excel document.
That's super common.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And everyone can have access to it. You guys can have those ongoing conversations. You can look at where the budget numbers are, and it's not kind of just like a document that's living on your desktop that you never look at again.
Sure. And the idea of sharing it, I think, is important because then everyone kind of has access and the people feel involved and they can kind of see where things are going. So, 100%. And the accountability too, right?
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing too. I mean, maybe you guys plan to sit down once a month and look at budget numbers and...
Sounds exciting.
Sounds really exciting. Pop open a bottle of wine and make it a little more fun.
Does that come out of the budget?
No, that's separate.
Okay.
But maybe, just keep in mind that you do need to touch base on that budget. After you book a vendor, I think that's the biggest thing. After you book a vendor, add it to your budget and then look at where you are. Do you need to adjust those numbers? Do you have a little extra money that maybe you can put towards something that you weren't sure if you were going to invest in? So kind of just making sure that you look at it on a regular occasion.
Sure. Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much on the budget side. That was super helpful, and I know that's one of the biggest concerns when you're first starting out.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important because again, it just sets you up for success later.
It does.
Your engagements are they take some time. It's not a sprint.
Right. And I think it's obviously a huge investment no matter what your budget is, and it's probably one of the biggest parties you've ever thrown, most likely. And so keeping in mind that it is not something that you have to book everything right away. Take your time, do your research, and make sure that you're sticking true to your budget and your priorities as a couple.
I think that's great. So thank you again for that.